Hello, all, and welcome to This Is Where I Land. I hope your Sunday was amazing. I know mine was. Today's subject is about the courage to change your mind. Somewhere along the way, we started treating changing our minds as weakness. We celebrate certainty, we reward confidence, we depend and defend on being right. But what if we misunderstood what growth actually is? Every one of us inherited a worldview before we were old enough to choose one. We inherited beliefs about God, politics, gender, love, race, and even family, and what it means to be a good person. The question isn't whether you inherited those values. The question is, have you ever examined them? Because if you haven't, how do you know the beliefs you're living by are truly your own? For me, that journey started with religion, not because I set out to reject it. I wasn't looking for reasons to walk away. I wasn't angry, and I wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. In fact, if you had asked me years ago where I would be today, I probably never would have imagined I'd be sitting here having this conversation. But I kept asking questions that I couldn't ignore, questions that made me uncomfortable. They weren't questions that disappeared just because I stopped thinking about them. Those questions followed me long after the church service ended. They stayed with me after I closed my Bible, even when everyone around me seemed satisfied with the answers they'd been given. I wasn't. I wanted my beliefs to make sense, not because I had inherited them, but because I'd examined them for myself. And the more questions I asked, the more I realized that the answers I had inherited no longer satisfied the questions I was asking. And here's what surprised me: those questions didn't stop at religion, they spilled into how I viewed women, relationships, parenting, power, purpose, and what it means to live an ethical life. One of the stories I grew up hearing was the story of Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis. In the story, where Eve is created from one of Adam's ribs. And growing up, I heard that story in a way that made me feel women were secondary. Whether that was everyone's interpretation isn't really the point. It became mine. Somewhere along the way, I internalized the idea that women were meant to follow, to support, and to be subservient. I even remember saying things like, I can't wait to be someone's missing rib. At the time, I thought that sounded beautiful. Looking back now to what wasn't that long ago, I realized it wasn't actually my dream. It was a story I had inherited. And that interpretation quietly shaped how I saw myself. It shaped what I thought a healthy relationship should look like. It molded my understanding about what my role was supposed to be. But as I got older, I started asking different questions. Why did I assume partnership meant a hierarchy? Why did I believe love required one person to lead and the other one to follow? Why had I never stopped to ask whether that interpretation reflected the kind of relationships I actually wanted to build? Those questions eventually led me somewhere unexpected. I realized that the relationships I admire the most in my life are built on love and respect and they're not built on superiority or submission. They're built on mutual respect and partnership and curiosity, shared responsibility, the freedom for both people to grow alongside one another. I didn't want to spend my life trying to become someone's missing piece. I wanted to become someone's equal, their partner, their best friend. And then I realized something. The beliefs I carry don't stop with me. They become the values I pass on. The stories I carry today become the stories my children may one day believe. And that made me ask an entirely different question. What kind of world am I preparing my children to live in? If you know me outside of here, you know I have a 3-year-old son. And lately, he's made me think about this conversation in an entirely different way. One day, my son is going to grow up and he's going to fall in love. And more than anything, I hope he finds someone who challenges him, someone who teaches him things he never would have learned on his own, someone who makes him laugh, someone who calls him out when he's wrong, and someone who celebrates his successes without feeling threatened by them, someone who dreams his dreams and they believe that his thoughts matter just as much as his own. Because that's what I think love is. Not one person leading and the other following, but two people becoming better because they chose to walk through this life together. We build entire worlds around our interpretations. And that's important because our convictions don't just shape what we think, they shape who we're willing to love, who we're willing to forgive, who we're willing to fear, and who we're willing to fight. That's why interpretation carries responsibility. We don't just interpret religious texts, we interpret our parents, our childhood failures, our marriages, even our cultures. And then we build lives around those interpretations. I don't think every interpretation is harmful. Some inspire compassion, others inspire service, and some inspire generosity, but every interpretation should remain open to examination because any belief, religious, political, cultural, or even personal, that asks us to diminish another person's humanity deserves another honest look. And maybe that's the question I've been learning to ask myself. If my religious beliefs cause me to treat people as less than human, if my political views cause me to stop seeing the humanity in people, if my family traditions teach prejudice, or if the story I tell myself says I'm not worthy of love, they all deserve another look. Because no worldview is beyond questioning if the consequences diminish our humanity or someone else's for that matter. I don't think examining our beliefs is a sign that we failed. I think it's one of the most human things we can actually do. And maybe that's why questioning has become so difficult. It's uncomfortable. It asks us to loosen our grip on certainty, to admit that we might not have the whole picture. But maybe that's also where growth begins. One of my favorite movies is Dead Poets Society. There's a scene where John Keating tells his students, words and ideas can change the world. But the part that stayed with me wasn't just the quote, it was the kind of teacher he chose to be. He didn't tell his students what to think, he taught them how to think. He challenged them to look at familiar things from unfamiliar perspectives, to question, to stay curious, to have the courage to stand somewhere new and discover the world looked different than they thought it did. I've come to believe that's true outside the classroom as well. Sometimes growth begins by having the courage to look at the same belief through a different perspective. And I think that's one of the bravest things that another human can teach us. I don't want to become someone who never changes because I'm afraid of being wrong. I want to become someone who's willing to follow truth wherever it leads, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs me certainty, and even when it changes who I thought I was. Because I don't think this is the end of this conversation. It's just where I land today. So I'll leave you with these two questions. Are you living by beliefs you actually examined or beliefs you inherited? And who might you become if you had the courage to rewrite the story you inherited? If this reflection gave you something to think about this week, the conversation doesn't end here. Head over to the new community tab and join this week's question of the week. I genuinely love to hear your perspective because I think we learn something when we reflect together. Until next Sunday, keep asking better questions, stay curious, and remember, wherever you are in your journey, I'm glad this is where we landed today. I'll see you next week.